I'm Janet Steinmeier, Lesley's president, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Evelyn M. Finnegan Children's Literature Lecture. This year, the Finnegan Lecture is being presented as part of Lesley's Thought Leadership Series, which brings a range of talents and voices working across the human arts to speak at Lesley. The series will conclude on March 24th with Marcia Medali, the CEO of Riverside Community Care, who will speak about addressing the mental health crisis in our country. Before I introduce tonight's honored guest, artist illustrator Ekua Holmes, I'd like to express our enduring gratitude to the family of the lecture's namesake, Evelyn M. Finnegan. As many in the Lesley community know, Evelyn studied early childhood education at what was then Lesley College and graduated in 1948. We're saddened at her passing in the fall of 2020, but we're pleased tonight that one of her children is here to represent the family. Please join me in welcoming Peter Finnegan. After graduation, Evelyn taught first grade and later started a preschool in her home on the South Shore, following in the footsteps of our founder, Edith Lesley. While raising her children, Evelyn volunteered as a storyteller at the town's library and hosted a children's story hour on the local cable TV. She ultimately became the children's librarian at the Scituate Public Library, and the children's wing there is dedicated to her and her husband, Paul. Evelyn was herself the author of 6 children's books, and she and her family supported aspiring writers by funding a creative writing scholarship here at Lesley in celebration of her 50th reunion. She inspired countless children to love reading and books, and she truly embodied Lesley's mission to educate people who will make a positive difference in their communities. It's this generous gift from Evelyn and her family to support our library's children's literature collection and teaching resources that spurred the creation of this lecture series in 2012 and established the Evelyn M. Finnegan 48 Children's Literature Collection at Lesley. We thank you again and again. So tonight, we're so excited that we can bring you another award-winning Finnegan speaker, artist illustrator Ekua Holmes. Tonight's program will also include a question and answer session with Ekua that's facilitated by Lesley Associate Professor Kate Castelli, who chairs our visual narrative and illustration departments in our College of Art and Design. For any of you who don't know Ekua, she's a lifelong Roxbury resident and is both a Caldecott medalist and a 2-time recipient of the prestigious Coretta Scott King Illustrator Award. As you'll hear and see tonight, collage is her chosen storytelling medium, but she is also a painter and a photographer, as well as a longtime community activist and civic leader. She works as Associate Director of Mass Arts Center for Arts and Community Partnerships and is Vice Chair of the Boston Art Commission, which oversees the city's public art. Last year, the New England Foundation for the Arts awarded her the Newell Flather Award for Leadership in Public Art. From last July to just last month, Ekua's collages were on exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts in an acclaimed solo show called Paper Stories, Layered Dreams. Over the past several summers, MFA visitors and passersby have admired the thousands of sunflowers planted outside the museum. The bright upward-looking flowers stand tall and are the work of the Roxbury Sunflower Project, which Ekua heads. They represent resilience, self-determination, and the Roxbury community's ability to evolve and emerge while staying grounded in its history and its traditions. That sunflower is such a lovely symbol of how art plants seeds of change that both lift us up and keep us grounded. As we imagine the role that art will play on our own campus and our campus plan, I'm thinking how spectacular our South Campus would look with a garden of sunflowers like that. It's only early in March, but spring is at our doorsteps, and Ekua's talk is sure to brighten our winter spirits and inspire us, just as her work inspires young readers to dream of making change in their communities when they grow tall. Welcome to Lesley, Ekua. The floor is all yours.
Good evening. How are you all doing? Thank you so much for being here. I want to first thank Lesley for inviting me to be a part of this evening's program. I was not aware of the Evelyn M. Finnegan Children's Literature Lectures, and I'm so honored to be included in a spectacular array of people that have been this speaker before. I'd like to share my screen with you and take you on a little journey that will include my origin story, the recent challenges and changes in my life through my work, the journey into children's literature, and all of the wonderful things that have happened as a result of working with the Museum of Fine Arts in sharing children's literature to a wider world. So I'm going to share my screen now. And here we go. I hope everyone can see that. Can somebody give me the high sign there that you can see everything?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, thank you so much. So we decided to call this talk The Art of the Book, Collage and Storytelling. Over the months since we came up with that title, so many things have happened, but I think we're still on point for that. I like to start every talk that I do honoring my parents. These are some early photographs of my tiny little family, which was my mother, my father, and me. And just really give them an honor for bringing forth an artist at a time when being an artist was not a popular thing, and supporting me through many years of school and just the crazy collecting and things that I did. My father unfortunately died when I was 8 years old, so the shouldering of that was really squarely on my mom, and she did everything that she could to help me grow into the person that I am today. I love this quote because when you have children yourself, you begin to understand what you owe your parents. And the second quote about we have not inherited this land from our ancestors, rather we have borrowed it from our children, which means we don't own this environment, we don't own this planet. It's on loan to us, and we should pass it on in good shape, in good measure. And also, as I've grown and had my own children, I understand the level of sacrifice that not only my mother made, but many other parents in my neighborhood, as well as around the world, around the country during the time that I was born. So I was born the same year that Emmett Till was murdered. I was born the year that Rosa Parks was determined to start the Montgomery bus boycott. And these two events were important sparks and strategies for the civil rights movement. I feel like I am a part of the generation that benefited from the laws that they changed and the doors that they opened. It's only now that I really understand what they went through. And much of that learning has come through becoming a children's book illustrator and the research and reading that goes with that. I decided at an early age that I wanted to be an artist, though not truly knowing everything that that would mean. If you can imagine, in 1965, you didn't necessarily want to tell your parents that you wanted to be an artist. Some of these things that are listed, these were more popular choices that parents wanted their children to make. They were professions that were attached to salaries, attached to large companies like Gillette, Raytheon, or universities, or even being a mother. A full-time mother was more acceptable and desired than an artist. However, I knew in my spirit somehow that that was what I was supposed to be at a very young age, and that that would include drawing, painting. Paint by numbers is what I was doing at the time, but just allowing my imagination to run free. Somehow my arrow's not working. There we go. So in the 60s, in my family at least, we did not have fine art in the home. It was not a line item in our budget, but I found ways to find Black imagery that I could relate to. One of the ways was the calendars that we received every year from local businesses. So that might be a gas station that put out a calendar, or a beauty shop, or a barber shop. And I remember so well always trying to put myself in these pictures. For instance, this little boy reminds me of little boys that grew up on my street. He might be somebody that I would want to play with or let him ride my bike. And the woman, I would look at her and say, oh, she's so beautiful. I hope I grow up to be a queen like she is. Another source of Black imagery was church fans. Sometimes you would just get one with a dove on it, but I would always want the ones that had families and children that I could imagine myself playing with or having dinner with. And then, because my father was such a music buff and a jazz lover, there were all of these albums in our house. And many of them featured beautiful Black women who were stars and who had beautiful voices. And I would sort of, in my mind, try on their different hairstyles and their looks. And then, of course, Nat King Cole was the star that reminded me most of my dad, a sharp dresser, dark and handsome, with an impish kind of smile. So I would lay on my living room floor and just study these albums and place myself with these folks. And then lastly, there was the kitchen. Now, I'm only showing Aunt Jemima tonight because she has recently taken her final leave from our grocery store shelves, but there was also Uncle Ben and Rastus. And somehow in my mind, I really thought of them as relatives who were just good at cooking. And I kind of missed Aunt Jemima when she changed in the 70s or the 80s. I think they changed her image and renovated her. And then finally, just recently, they've taken her off completely. Not sure yet how I feel about that. But these were pretty much the places that I saw images of Black folks that looked like my neighbors, looked like my family members. Then I met a friend whose mother had a lithograph. She had artwork in her house, and this was one of the lithographs that she had. It was by John Wilson, who was born in Roxbury, and who was a very important artist internationally, but certainly one of our favorite artists here in Boston. He's the creator of the Eternal Presence at the National Center for Afro-American Artists. But I would come to their house and I would see this lithograph and think, those look like my friends. Those are the kinds of things that we like to do, making paper boats and letting them float down the stream of water. She also had a piece like this by Richard Yard, which I looked at and I thought, there's room for me in this picture. I could be sitting with those kids and we could be thinking about what we're going to play today. When I tell my granddaughter that, in my day, we would just get together and make up games, that just seems so strange to her because she has access to computers and smartphones and all kinds of things. But there's something very welcoming about this picture. It may be the doorway, it may be the stoop, it may just be the expression on the kids that they're waiting for someone to come along and make the day more exciting. So when I would visit my friend, I would also visit these works of art and I would stare at them. And I think somewhere in my spirit, I would think, I'm going to make art like that one day. I love this quote because I never did forget those works of art, even though I hadn't seen them in many, many years, and just recently came upon the one by John Wilson as the Museum of Fine Arts has acquired it for their collection. When I was 7 or 8 years old in the 3rd grade at the David A. Ellis School, my teacher, Miss Goldberg, pulled my mother aside and told her to watch her in the arts. Now, my mother did not tell me this story right away. In fact, it was years later when she told me after art school. But all I remember about Miss Goldberg's class, she was a very nice lady. And if you finished your work early, you could go to the back of the room where there were big Lego sets and erector sets and log cabin sets. And I loved building. So I always made it a point to finish my work early so that I could go and play in the back of the room. Another thing that happened around that time is my mother decided to take me to the MFA for the Saturday classes. I had never really seen an art studio before. And at the MFA, we were actually in a little basement room, but they had wire armatures and a broken plaster cast of Roman gods and just all kinds of materials. And the teacher would lead us through a project. And it seemed like I had no sooner gotten there than my mother was knocking on the door to pick me up because I just lost myself in time making art. And it's been that way ever since. So at 7 or 8 years old, I feel like that's my feet on the path toward pursuing the arts. Now this girl is also about 7 or 8 years old. It's a work of art called Golden that I created about 10 years ago. And she has become the symbol for Paper Stories, Layered Dreams. When she was put on the front of the Museum of Fine Arts, I felt something deeply satisfying, that at one time I was a little girl running up the steps of the MFA to take classes, but now I was back as an adult 50 plus years later. But this time I'm bringing my entire neighborhood, my friends, and everyone into the museum so that we can enjoy the beautiful works of art there. If not for the courage of a group of students from a Dorchester school and their teachers who felt that they had been mistreated at the museum, this moment may not have come. And I know that I am a part of a statement that the museum is trying to make about welcoming people that have often felt excluded from the museum environment. But I wanted to make the most of it. I felt directly connected to those students' concerns and committed to standing in for them in the ways that I could. It's time institutions like this are challenged to walk their talk in more significant ways. So from the outside of the building to the inside, I asked them to blow Golden up floor to ceiling to continue that welcoming spirit, that follow me spirit inside. This exhibition was my Mary Tyler Moore moment. Not that I had dreamt of having a show at the MFA, because I really didn't. It was not something that, I can't say I thought it was impossible, but it was not something that I thought about. So here was another door opening for me in the arts, and I stepped in it. My curator, Megan Melvin, who was wonderful to work with, along with the rest of the staff at the MFA, wrote this line: "If art has the power to transform lives, the art in children's literature has the potential to change the future." My first artworks really were seen on the pages of children's stories, Bible stories, the golden chickens and the little ducks and bunnies and things like that. That's where I saw my first pencil sketches and watercolors and things like that. And I was drawn to them even as a much younger child. But as we were planning the show, which we had intended to make it very interactive, we would have a story corner where we could invite storytellers to come in and read to children. Here comes COVID. And now all of a sudden, we can't even have a show. So the first thing that happens is the show gets postponed, and then it gets postponed again. And in the midst of that, there were layoffs, furloughs, people were were leaving, the great resignation that we all talk about. And of course, there were not going to be any in-person events, which is what we had planned. And it seemed to us that how could we have a show about children's literature when we couldn't even have books because they couldn't have more than one person touch a book at a time? But yet we went ahead with the planning. As I said, the staff at the museum is wonderful, but it felt lonely. The halls were empty. There weren't people coming through. And I began to feel like, is this show going to touch anyone? Which is the purpose of all art, I think, is to reach out to people. So among all the uncertainty and that loneliness at the MFA, there was a bright light. And that was the teen curators, which was a group of teenagers who had been meeting to learn about the back story of how to put shows together, learning about art, talking about it. And so I asked if maybe they could be on my curatorial team. And they said yes. And so I met with them. There were 4 of them from 4 different high schools in the Boston and Cambridge area. We met, we looked at art. As a living artist, which is not what they were accustomed to, I was there to answer their questions, to entertain ideas. I was really interested in what they thought about children's literature. What role had it played in their lives? What did they think was missing on the bookshelf? Did they plan on including children's literature in their lives? I always say that the youth voice is the voice of the future, and I believe that youth voice must be engaged in all the spaces where the future is being discussed. So each of them selected a book to write about. There were 5 books that we profiled at the show. 4 of them were exhibited, and they were asked to write the wall text. Now, these are high school students. I have no doubt that this experience will travel with them, and I want to share with you what one of them wrote. The quality of the writing, the depth of their thinking and their emotion is just really, really touched me. This was written by Tariq Charles about a book called Black as a Rainbow Color. And he says, "This book encompasses all the pleasure and pain that comes with being Black. Each page either teaches readers about Black history or educates them on what it is to be Black in America. For example, Holmes dedicates an illustration to Thurgood Marshall, a civil rights leader who was heavily involved with the NAACP. The book's protagonist, however, is an everyday girl who claims that Black is her color, but it is not included in any rainbows. This statement draws a parallel to what it's like to be Black in America, where it feels like Black culture is separate from a typical American culture." Ekua Holmes's artwork is as detailed as the words in this book. The illustrations vary in style with each turn of the page, representing a myriad of emotions like a mood ring. Some of the images have outlines like a coloring book, which Holmes uses to suggest that young people have the opportunity to color their own worlds. Many of the books that she illustrates deal with themes of social justice and empowerment. She uses her art to give a voice to the voiceless. My favorite picture is a collage of headlines from civil rights era newspapers, in step with history. None of the headlines is complete, but the reader is able to pick out small tidbits of information in each title. The incomplete titles are reminiscent of the Black struggle that takes place in America. They symbolize our job and journey to grow as a people, which is never done. The battle for civil rights didn't end when the Klan stopped marching. It's a battle that continues on today. So I was just completely moved by, as I say, the depth of their research, their questions, and their final projects, which were on the walls of the Museum of Fine Arts. These are 16, 17, 18-year-olds who have already participated in a solo show at a major US museum. And I'm just so happy about that aspect of the show. So many people ask me about collage. Collage is my medium. It is the most democratic. Everyone can do it. It's the most inexpensive and simple. Scissors, paper, glue. But what does it take to take something discarded and make it into something priceless, desired, and elevated? This act is a part of many traditions of Black Americans, from the world of quilt making, exemplified by Gee's Bend, to the culinary exploitations of our chefs with chitlins and greens, to the naming of our children and our songs, our jazz. There's this woman, Terry Henderson, has created a book called Black Collagist. And she says, historically, the methods of collage and assemblage have been inextricably linked to Black culture, using what has been discarded to create a priceless object. And Robert Motherwell, of course, says that collage is the 20th century's greatest innovation. And I agree with him. My work is, my heroes are local. And I spend a lot of my artistic currency on exploring the childhood that I had growing up in Roxbury. I want to honor my ancestors, honor my community, And I also love the sense of building an image from parts pulled together from far corners into a harmonious melody. It's the sense of unlocking a puzzle through the assembling of pieces. It is an act of love. As I say, many of my heroes are local, and my works reflect on a childhood growing up in a space of freedom and security, being cared for by wise and loving adults. If it sounds idyllic, so be it. So this first image that I want to share with you is called Girl Literature. And it is in honor of Barbara Clark Elam, who you see on the right. She is my aunt by marriage, and she was a librarian, which was a rare creature in the 60s and 70s. But she was completely dedicated to opening up the world of literature to anyone who is interested. The way that she's looking at her daughter, Jocelyn, in this photograph is how she looked at every child as precious, as worthy of care and attention. And so I wanted to do something for her because she was the one that took me to the library every week to pick up my stack of books. She was the one that taught myself and my cousin Trisha how to create our own books by sewing the pages together and making the book covers. And that had a tremendous impact on the path that my life has taken. In this second piece, which is also honoring reading, reading has been such a gift and a companion for me. This piece is called Precarious, and this is a young man that I saw in a waiting room at a health center, and he had taken it upon himself to pull up a stack of magazines that he was reading. No one was telling him sit down and read or anything like that. He was just curious. He was a curious intellectual child. And so I engaged with him and asked him if his mom was around because I'd like to take his picture. And she agreed. And this is the work of art that came from it. In a case of art imitating life or life imitating art at the exhibition, this young man, Xavier, shows up and he's got on almost the exact same outfit as the young man in the artwork. And as we talk, he tells me that he wants to be an engineer, but he also has his own podcast and is a DJ that works for different events already. So a dynamic individual who had come to the museum to look at art with his mom, who could have stepped out of this picture. This is another piece called The Summer of '62. And as you can see, it's made up of wallpapers and math pages and stock pages and some of the kinds of things that I love to work with, magazine cutouts and those kinds of things. And I talked to children today about how on Saturday, after you did your chores, because you did have chores, you went outside and you stayed outside all day. And in this particular work of art, this young man is the first one out. And he's probably one of the only kids that has a bike on the street that he's going to share. But in this moment, he seems like he's contemplating the beauty of his environment, the transforming butterfly, the flowers, and also looking at all of the different environments that he's allowed to go in and out of that are fenced in and keep him sort of at bay from the city that you can see in the distance. The title of it, Summer of '62, is very personal to me. It represents the last summer before my father passed away, that last summer of innocence. And so for him and for me, that date has significance. This is a very popular piece with young people. It's called King of the Hill. Who doesn't want to be a prince or a king? A lot of kids like it because it actually has a street sign in it. And we found out, my cousin and I, through some of our travels and Zoom meetings, that there are Humboldt avenues in other cities. But this is a young man who is expressing his sovereignty in his neighborhood. He feels completely comfortable going to and fro, up and down Humboldt Avenue, meeting with his friends. This is his neighborhood, and he feels a sense of ownership and sovereignty in it. Matter of Time is also a work of art that a lot of people talk about. They talk about the color, they talk about the figures as someone that the figures can really be related to, even though they don't have facial figures. I've had children tell me that that's them and their father or them and their grandfather, without hesitation, without sort of thinking about it, they see themselves in these two figures in a relaxed pose. The boy has modeled himself in a way after the father and how he's sitting. And it's sort of my statement about how children do model themselves after the caring adults in their lives, or even the uncaring adults in their lives. And so it's up to us to put our best foot forward when interacting with them and always share the best of ourselves. This is Sufficient Grace, Miss Ivy Beckles. This is an interesting story. I met this woman. I should mention that I ended up majoring in photography in college. And so I've always taken a lot of photographs. And then I found that many of them I wanted to make collages from or be inspired to make collages from. I met this woman at a restaurant. I should say I inserted myself in her life because as I looked over at her, I saw something so just elegant, refined, and divine that I wanted to take her picture, but not without her permission. So I got up the courage to go over and ask her if I could take her picture, and she said yes. And then for many years, I just admired the photograph. And one day I decided that I wanted to do a piece from it. After I completed the work, I wished I had found out her name and her address so that I could share the piece with her, but I had no information. And that was, that was not a cool thing for me. But years later, I walked into the Museum of the National Center of Afro-American Artists, and she was sitting there. She had come to see an exhibition. And as it turned out, she was an art collector and the aunt of one of my friends, Brian McFarlane. So coming full circle, I was like a fangirl running up to her. And of course, she wouldn't remember me from years ago, but I was able to pull up the image on my smartphone and share it with her. And she was very gracious, gave me lots of praise for it. And, the reason that, another reason that this was such an interesting person to me is that she sort of epitomized the women that were in my church when I was growing up. I mean, definitely you wore a hat in church, you covered your head in church, but there was also a sense that she had lived a life that had not been without obstacles, but that she had overcome each obstacle with grace. And so that's why I titled it Sufficient Grace. It's also a part of a scripture. After I met her and found out her name, I adjusted the title to be Sufficient Grace, Miss Ivy Beckles. And then lastly, I think this is the last piece of art that I'm going to share. This is Time Out. This is also a man that used to do a handyman work on my street. And his name was Jack. And every time I saw Jack, he always had on overalls and had a straw hat, and he had his tools, and he was always coming from one job or another. But on this particular day, I saw him and he was dressed to the nines, as the old folks would say. And I said, Jack, you look spectacular. Do you mind if I take your picture? And he agreed, and he became the subject of Time Out. Now, in the photograph, he's not holding that newspaper and he doesn't have a cane, but he came to symbolize a man who's maybe worked to retirement and is now taking time out to just smell the flowers and enjoy life and sit while looking very elegant and inspiring to passersby. So those are the images that were hanging in J.P. Lick's, an ice cream shop in Jamaica Plain, when an art director from Candlewick Press came in with her daughter for an ice cream cone. From looking at that artwork, she contacted me and offered me an opportunity to illustrate Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement. I asked myself why. What did she see? And I believe she saw the stories in my images. Now, you have to understand, I had at one time thought about becoming an illustrator when I was in college. I began taking classes in that major and quickly realized that I was in the wrong place. I didn't draw well. I didn't really like drawing. I wasn't neat, and it seemed I never quite grasped what my professors wanted. They weren't happy with me, and I was not happy with them. So I moved on to another major and completed my studies, placing illustration in that do not disturb part of my mind. Now, 40 plus years later, I am being asked to illustrate a book, and not a bunny book or a daisy book, but a book about the civil rights icon, woman of power, inspiration, Fannie Lou Hamer. Sometimes you chase the dream, but other times the dream chases you. Using scraps of paper, fabric, glue, and scissors, that was my way of drawing and storytelling, and I finally caught up with my destiny. These are also the images that I shared and discussed with the team curators, and they're the images that I sent to my cousin, Trisha Elam Walker, and from which she wrote Dream Street. We had decided to do something together. After all, she had become a published author, a published writer, and I had become a published illustrator. This is what we dreamt of as children. As we were sitting on the living room floor making our books, we knew what we wanted to be. And now that we were adults and we had achieved those dreams, we wanted to do a project together, primarily, I think, to honor our parents who believed in us and made sure that we had the best education. So we're really happy with the attention that the book is getting and the kinds of things that people are saying about the book. Now you've seen the artwork on its own. I'm going to share with you how the artwork looks in the book and how the book is put together. But I stumbled upon this quote by Harriet Tubman, which I thought was so appropriate. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. That was Harriet Tubman. And those words are still so very true. So this is how the book is set up with collages and Trisha's text, which is brilliant. The first page says, "Welcome to Dream Street, the best street in the world. Just ask the people who live here. The houses and the dreams inside are different as thumbprints. The sidewalks are wide enough for huge chalk drawings and giant hopscotch boards. Children from all over the neighborhood come to play until the streetlights go on." Well, we were fortunate to be included in the list of best books for 2021-22, as well as many starred reviews. But what really touches us is when people write in who are reading these books with their children, and many teachers who are developing curriculum around this idea of a dream street where dreams are nurtured and cared for. I want to share with you what someone else wrote to us. Dream Street is a mighty mountain of joy. It is the most gorgeous story of community and the carefree essence of a beautiful childhood lived in a place of warmth and safety. There isn't a doubt in my mind that it's because the book is written by cousins and real-life residents of this special street. Dream Street is a story that honors the young and the old in equal measure. It is both a love letter to their ancestors and a roadmap for the future, all rolled into one. Each of the lives on Dream Street intertwines and grows together like the flowers in Desiree's yard. They sing together as a chorus in a song that exists in only this one place. Here are a couple of other pages. So you saw Time Out. The gentleman in Time Out, Jack, becomes Mr. Sidney in the book, who reads the newspaper on his stoop, dressed to the nines. Mr. Sidney is a retired mail carrier, living his dream of never having to wear a uniform again. He tips his big brown fedora and greets everyone with, "Don't wait to have a great day, create one." There are the Phillips boys that have 5 sons named after jazz musicians: Dudley, Donald, Donardo, Dexter, and Duke. These boys are more than a handful, some say, but they know not to act up or show out. It's so interesting to me that Trisha was able to extract these beautiful vignettes out of this artwork. And someone asked, what was it like to work with a cousin? And I said, you know, we have absolute trust in one another. But the truth of the matter is that authors and illustrators don't usually work together. Once the manuscript is purchased by the publishing company, they work together to select illustrators that they're interested in and make an offer. And then the illustrator is on their own to follow their own path of research and design. And the author, if the author is of note, they may get to look at some sketches here or there in the process, but it's not like two people sitting down and deciding together. When I first got involved in the industry, I didn't understand that, and now I do. Each artist has to have the space to develop their own ideas. And then here's Zion, who you saw earlier, who wants to be a librarian. One of the things that we were able to do is embed some of our family members in the story. For instance, the librarian here, where Zion is Miss Barbara, named after Trisha's mom and my aunt. And there's another piece where my granddaughter is one of the protagonists on the page. So Trisha and I have had the chance to come together, talk to children about being dreamers and what it means to also become nurturers of each other's dreams. We're all in community together. And so we all kind of rise together. And kids have great questions. They have the best questions, and they can see themselves somewhere on the pages of this book, whether it's nurturing the dreams of an adult or understanding that their grandmother really, really cares about their interest in becoming a lepidopterist or those kinds of things. So we were at the Museum of Fine Arts, signing books, talking to people. And I have to say that I was really excited that the museum sold so many books. It was like cross-marketing, where you had, the audience of people who buy children's books, but then you also had an audience of people who look at art, and they came together in this space. And my understanding is they sold quite a few books. So memory, nostalgia, story sharing, family, imagination, dreams, and future casting. These are the fields from which stories emerge by closely observing and responding to life. Collage is a medium that can use everyday throwaway items with which to build priceless images. Everyday moments are illuminated and spotlighted by the artist in service of humanity, allowing us to explore aspects of our lived and shared experiences. Because we didn't have art in my home, I made a promise that as an artist, I would always make my art affordable and accessible, works that even a child could own. So I've always made greeting cards and postcards and prints. But with the expansion into children's books, I've been able to keep that promise more profoundly than I had imagined. I'm going to skip over this slide. I wanted to tell the story of this woman who came from New York to see the show. She loaned this piece to the exhibition, and she purchased this for her son. The idea that art in the home is an article that can inspire our children, that they can forecast their future by looking at works of art, not just in picture books, because eventually children get older and don't necessarily want to look at picture books, even though I feel like you're never too old for a picture book. But I love the fact that she purchased this piece for her son. He doesn't look like he's more than 13 years old. And in the piece called Walter Age 10, in honor of Walter Dean Myers, you can see in the brick wall next to the basketball court that there are family and friends that are cheering this young man on, whatever he decides to do. And as an illustrator, I'm always trying to put layers of meaning in my artwork, and collage is the perfect medium for that. The other thing that was so great about this exhibition and this intersection between children's literature and fine art are messages like this. We put out several comment books, and 5 of them filled up over the course of the show. And this one, handwritten in pencil, because you can't have pens in the museum. This person says, "I see me, so many pieces of my life, history, lineage on these walls, in these colors, in these faces, in these photographs. Thank you for allowing space for me to breathe, to exhale, nod my head in amens, and be blessed." So when you hear things like that, you know that you have responded to the call for your life and that you have purpose and meaning going forward. These are some of the things that I make available at very low cost for children, or even give them away a lot of times. And this is a book pulled from a library shelf by a young reader. So starting from the world of books at my neighborhood library as a child and returning full circle as an image maker, richer, wiser, and more inspired. Romary Bearden said, the function of the artist is to organize the facets of life according to his imagination. Nina Simone said, an artist's responsibility is to reflect the times. And James Baldwin said, artists are here to disturb the peace. I look to these artists and writers to light the way so that in my work, I may have courage to imagine wildly, reflect deeply, and if needed, disturb the way things are for a better future. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And I hope that we'll have a wonderful conversation going forward.
Thank you, Ekua. That was a fantastic presentation. And I want to open up. We have some wonderful questions for you from the audience. A lot of curiosity about your technique. So people are curious about where you source your materials and also if you add or alter those materials prior to using them.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I collect everything. I throw away nothing. I also have wonderful friends who will sometimes bring me snippets of things that no one would want. And they find their way into my artwork. Now I have found papers and objects. I have made papers and objects. I think in one of the slides I showed, I paint papers in colors that I want. I use rubber stamps and stencils to pattern. I might paint over newspaper or magazines to make the color the way I want, but still keep the text as part of the image. I really like things that have had a life before I have gotten hold of them because I feel like that adds to the richness of the storytelling.
Fantastic. So another question was, do you always work from reference photos or do you work from life? You know, how are you building these fantastic images that are part memory and part reference and part observation?
Mm-hmm. I'd say it's a mixed bag, but I do like to photograph. I just love photography. It's one of, it's like my second love, maybe to collage, or maybe my first. But composition, lighting, all of those things play as much a role in a collage as they do in a traditional painting. So a lot of times I do work from a photograph. I look for what are the strong elements of that photograph that can be reinterpreted in pattern and form and color. Sometimes though, I build an image completely from imagination. So not all of the, maybe not all of the body is exactly in the, the way that a body really looks, but maybe I'm exaggerating the hands or exaggerating parts of the face and that sort of thing. So I have many different ways that I work depending on what the project is or what I'm trying to express.
Fantastic. Another question we have about the collage process is, what is a recommendation for people who want to get involved in collage or start collage if they haven't ever worked in that medium before?
Well, the great thing about collage is you need three things. You need scissors. Well, actually, you don't even need scissors because you can tear pieces of paper. You need something to attach things to, and you need something that you want to arrange and attach. I work a lot, we do a lot of workshops through my job with Mass Art, where we take in magazines, we take in colored paper, and people just, decide what they want to talk about. Sometimes it's just an abstract concept. Sometimes you're just looking at how colors look together or how shapes look together. So my advice to anyone who wants to do anything is start tomorrow. Tomorrow when you get up, make a collage. Take a magazine, cut some stuff out, take a glue stick, stick it down, look at it and see what it does for you. And then just keep going forward, because to be honest with you, that to me is the rule of life. Keep going forward and start today. I'll say start tomorrow because it's already almost 8 o'clock, but start, don't judge yourself. Don't talk yourself out of it. You have no one to satisfy but yourself. And if you want to make collages, make collages. That's what I do.
So a follow-up question perhaps to that is, how long does this process take? Do you find that some images come quicker than others? Do you struggle to compose certain images in their complexity?
Absolutely. Yes, 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 and yes. So some things feel like they're just there and you just put it down and it's done. And then other things, especially in this field now of children's literature, where I'm responding to text. Sometimes the text may need an illustration that isn't necessarily something that I would do. Like in the Fannie Lou Hamer book, there was a scene where she was coming from milking the cows. I don't really have a relationship with cows, but I had to find out how to make that interesting for myself. I think in that particular case, I liked the way it turned out, but there have been other illustrations where I've really struggled to find something that both satisfies me as the artist and satisfies the art director. So I think that be prepared for all of that variety, just like life. You have some days, you have bad hair days, good hair days, you have days when you're tired, you have days when you're full of energy. It's that same kind of variety that happens on the canvas or on the page.
I love that. It has to flow from someplace, so let it flow. Are there any dream projects or titles or even authors that you would love to work with or create art for?
I've been asked that before. I have loved every single project that I've done, but that doesn't mean that I loved it when I first took it. So I'll give you an example. The book Stuff of Stars, which was about the unfurling of the universe, was written by Marion Dane Bauer, who has written over 100 books for children. And I received the manuscript from Candlewick Press, and I thought, why would they want me to do this book? It doesn't seem like my style, doesn't seem like anything I'd be good at, but it was early in my career and I didn't want to say no. And so I took the project and I struggled from day one. Like everything I did was just clunky and just nothing like the universe. And at one point I was thinking, okay, well, I haven't really spent my advance, so maybe I'll just take the check back and just tell them, no, I think, somebody else might be better, and just sort of back away from the project, and no one would ever know, right? You would never know that I didn't do Stuff of Stars. But my mother had given me some wonderful advice as a young person who probably would have been diagnosed with ADD had that been a thing in my day. And she would say, just do the next thing. Don't worry about what's going to happen down the road. Don't worry about next week, tomorrow even. Just do what you have to do right now. And so on this particular day, I was going to clean my studio, which anybody out there who works in mixed media and who's a little bit messy understands that sometimes you just have to stop and clean up. And I was sweeping my floor, and I always inspect my floor sweepings because there might be a beautiful little head in there or a hand or a leaf or something. And I saw this rectangle of marbleized paper. And I said, wow, that looks like the universe. It looked like the Milky Way, and it was so swirly and wonderful. And it was like a eureka moment. That's what I needed to do this book. I needed marbleized paper so that I could have that free-flowing ink that is not what I have in collage. So once I made that decision, I took some classes. I made my own marbleized paper, and the book grew out of that. I still use some traditional elements of cutting the shapes and figures. And that book was one of the Coretta Scott King Illustrator Award winners. And I almost walked away from it. So I think, you learn probably more from your failures than you do from your successes. Excuse me 1 minute. So I wouldn't advise walking away from something that's challenging. You will grow into it, and that will make you stronger and better.
I can't think of a better way to actually wrap up the Q&A portion of this lecture, and give a huge shout out to the Finnegan committee for organizing and bringing Ekua Lesley and to this wonderful space. And Ekua, I want to extend our thanks for joining us tonight and giving us a glimpse into your studio practice and your world that is incredibly gorgeous and just so utterly beautiful in a time when I think we need a little bit of sunshine.
Absolutely. Well, I certainly appreciate being here. For all the people who came out, I can't see you, but I know you're there, and I thank you for spending this time with us this evening. I just feel like the world is in a difficult place, that image making has a powerful role to play, and children's literature as well. So buy some books for kids and show them something new.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and week.